I was scrolling through my tablet, a small luxury I'd afforded myself last Christmas, when I came across it. A story shared on a forum, one of those places where women of a certain age gather to share recipes and quiet frustrations. It was about a daughter who had mocked her own mother's poverty at a party, serving her leftovers on a paper plate as a cruel joke. The comments section was a wildfire of fury. Who could humiliate their own mother like that, on her birthday of all days? But what made the blood in my veins run cold wasn't the cruelty of the story itself. It was that I was reading it while standing at my own kitchen sink, my hands immersed in soapy water, washing the dishes from my own 66th birthday dinner. The dinner where my daughter, Sarah, had laughed and told me, in front of my entire family, that I could eat the pig swill I'd cooked, because it suited me. Nobody had defended me. Not my son-in-law, not even my grandchildren. But this is what they didn't know. I wasn't just some humiliated old woman in a charity shop dress. I was the woman who still owned the very house they were living in. And that laugh, I decided, as the suds popped and vanished around my wrinkled fingers, was the very last one they would earn at my expense in this home that I turned 66 today. Earlier, as I'd stirred the homemade mint sauce in the kitchen, I had allowed myself a small, private smile. The dress I'd chosen, a periwinkle blue floral tea dress from a little boutique Arthur, and I had loved in the Cotswolds, felt soft against my skin. A hug from a better time. It was the same dress I'd worn the day he'd told me, with the sun in his eyes, that I was the most beautiful woman in the world. I'd pressed every pleat with care, wanting to look my best for them. My skin, though lined, was still good, and I'd applied a touch of rose-tinted lipstick and the string of pearls Arthur had given me for our 30th anniversary. They felt cool and heavy against my collarbone, a familiar comfort. The dining room table had looked perfect. I'd laid out the lace placemats inherited from my own Nan, the good Wedgwood china I only brought out for special occasions, and 3 small crystal vases holding daisies from the back garden. The rich aroma of slow-cooked lamb, tender and falling off the bone, mingled with the earthy scent of rosemary and creamy mashed potatoes I'd put through a ricer twice to get them perfectly smooth. Everything exactly as Arthur had loved it for our Sunday lunches. "Grandma, can I help with anything?" Lily's voice, soft and hesitant, pulled me from my reverie. My 11-year-old granddaughter stood in the kitchen doorway, her large, curious eyes fixed on me. "Of course, my love," I'd replied, drying my hands on my apron. "Could you please put the linen napkins on the table? They're in the top drawer of the sideboard." Lily nodded and padded into the dining room. She had always been the sweetest of my grandchildren, more willing to help, more observant. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with a thoughtful expression, as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle the adults were hiding from her. From the living room, I could hear the roar of a football match on the television and Mark's voice, my son-in-law, shouting at the referee. Jack, my 14-year-old grandson, was probably upstairs, a headset clamped over his ears, lost in his digital world of furious battles and guttural music. At his age, I knew family gatherings were more of an obligation than a pleasure, something I understood perfectly. I'd been a head of English for 35 years. I knew the teenage heart all too well. "Mom, is the food ready yet?" Sarah's voice rang out from the living room, tinged with that impatience she'd developed over the last few years, as if the world was a slow-moving queue she was constantly stuck in. "Mark has to leave early." I took a deep breath before answering. "Almost ready, darling. Give me 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes." I was always asking for 5 more minutes of their patience, 5 more minutes of their understanding. Ever since Arthur had passed away 3 years ago and I'd moved in with Sarah and her family, it seemed I was constantly apologizing for taking up space in what was, technically, my own house. But they didn't know that, and I had never reminded them. Love, I had believed, shouldn't need property deeds as proof that I finished plating the food onto the Wedgwood serving dishes and carried them to the dining room one by one. The lamb stew, the creamy mash, the honey-glazed carrots, the home-baked bread rolls I knew Lily adored, and finally, the vibrant green mint sauce I'd been perfecting all morning. "Dinner is served," I announced, removing my apron and smoothing down my dress one last time. The family gathered around the table with the usual clatter of scraping chairs, half-formed conversations, and the reluctant clicking of phones being set aside. Mark sat at the head of the table, in the chair that had once been Arthur's, while Sarah took her usual place to my right. The children settled opposite us, Jack with that look of martyred teenage resignation I knew so well. "Well," I said, trying to inject some joy into my voice, "thank you all for being here for my birthday. It means the world to have you all here." There were murmurs of happy birthday around the table, but I noticed the way Sarah was examining the food with an expression I had come to dread. It was the same look she gave the discount aisle at the supermarket, assessing whether something was a bargain or just a waste of time. "Mom," she said, prodding the tender lamb with her fork, "honestly, do you still cook this sort of poor man's food?" The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I felt the smile freeze on my face. "It's your father's lamb recipe," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. "He always said it was the best in Hertfordshire." Sarah let out a short, humorless laugh. "Dad said a lot of things." She lifted her fork, a piece of lamb poised on the tines, holding it up to the light as if inspecting something foul. "Look at this. This pig swill." Her voice rose, ensuring everyone could hear. "Go on, eat up. It suits you." The laughter that followed was the worst part. Not open, cruel laughter. That would have been easier to confront. It was the awkward, nervous tittering that spread around the table like a stain. Mark cleared his throat and looked down at his plate. The children exchanged glances, Lily biting her lower lip, Jack suddenly finding his mashed potatoes utterly fascinating. Nobody said a thing. Nobody defended me. I just sat there, in the blue dress Arthur had loved, surrounded by the family I had cooked for, cleaned for, and sacrificed for. And I understood with a painful clarity that I was utterly, completely alone. "You're right," I said finally, my voice emerging calmer than I felt. "It is simple food." I stood up from the table, picked up my barely touched plate, and walked to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard the conversation gradually resume, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just stripped the dignity from the woman who'd raised them, who paid the mortgage on this house, who had set up a trust to secure their futures. As I washed the dishes, the tears finally came. Not of sadness, but of a strange, liberating determination. For 35 years I had taught literature. I had shown generations of students the power of words, the importance of respect, the beauty of human dignity. In my classroom, I had a zero-tolerance policy for cruelty. Why had I allowed it to be any different in my own home? The soapy water washed away the remnants of the lamb stew, but it couldn't wash away the decision taking shape in my mind. A decision as clear and firm as the lessons I had taught for decades. Respect isn't begged for, it is commanded. And when it cannot be commanded, you simply remove yourself from the game. The smile that had bloomed on my lips the night before had transformed into something deeper by dawn. A serene determination that ran through my veins like strong black coffee. I woke before the birds, a habit ingrained from decades of teaching. But this time it wasn't routine that pulled me from my bed, but the urgent, thrilling pulse of a new beginning. My tablet, resting on the bedside table, vibrated softly. I'd spent an hour the previous night scrolling through old university alumni pages until I found her. Diane. My Diane. Her profile picture showed a woman with the same mischievous eyes I remembered. Her silver hair cut in a chic bob, standing on a sunny promenade with the sea sparkling behind her. I had sent a message, short and cryptic, just asking if she ever thought of the old days. Her reply, sent at 5:47 a.m., was waiting. "B. Holloway. As I live and breathe. Of course I do. Call me. I'm an early bird, just like you always were." "It sounds like you have a story to tell." I smiled as I made my way to the kitchen to brew a pot of tea. The house was still, a tomb of slumbering resentment. Sarah and Mark wouldn't stir for another 2 hours, and the children wouldn't surface until absolutely necessary for school. This was my time, my moment of peace before the daily chaos began. I dialed Diane's number as the kettle boiled, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. She answered on the second ring. Beatrice Holloway, her voice, warm and rich with a faint West Country lilt, was as familiar as my own, despite the 30 years that had passed. "You old sod, what have you been up to?" We'd been inseparable at university. Two bright-eyed girls vowing that life would never tear us apart. Life, of course, had other plans: marriage, children, careers, the slow erosion of distance. But hearing her voice now, it felt as if no time had passed at all. "Diane?" I murmured, surprised at the crack in my own voice. I just needed to hear a friendly voice. "Oh, love. Something in your message told me this wasn't just a trip down memory lane. What's going on?" For the next 20 minutes, as the sun began to filter pale gold light through the kitchen windows, I told her everything. The birthday, the humiliation, the years of feeling like a ghost in my own home. Diane listened without interruption, making only small sounds of understanding and, occasionally, a sharp intake of breath that signaled her outrage. "B," she said finally, "do you remember what you told me when that Torag Michael Peters stood me up for the summer ball?" I smiled through a film of tears. "I told you that no one who makes you feel small is worth the space they take up in your world." Exactly. And here you are, a woman of 66, needing to be reminded of your own bloody wisdom. It's different when it's family, Diane. It's my daughter. "No, darling," she countered, her voice firm. "It's different when you decide it's different. But respect is a non-negotiable currency, no matter whose name is on the bank account." I heard footsteps on the floor above. Sarah was stirring. "I have to go," I whispered. "But Diane, do you think it's too late for a grand reinvention?" Her laugh was like warm honey. "B, I bought a little townhouse in Salcombe last year. It has a spare room with a sea view that is practically weeping for a housemate who knows how to make that lemon drizzle cake you used to bribe the porters with. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, my door is wide open." We hung up just as Sarah slouched into the kitchen. Her hair a messy bun, her face set in its usual morning scowl. She was dressed in expensive-looking black leggings and a tight-fitting top that showed off the toned body she worked on for 2 hours every day at a gym I paid the membership for. She headed straight for the coffee machine without a word of greeting. "Morning, Sarah," I said gently. "Sleep well?" She glanced at me over her shoulder as she poured her coffee. "Fine. Listen, Mom, I need you to pick up my dress from the dry cleaners today. I need it for a work thing tomorrow." Not a question, a command. As always. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice betraying none of the seismic shifts happening within me. For the last time, I thought. Once the house emptied, Sarah to the gym, Mark to his sales job, the children to school, I retrieved my old leather-bound address book and started making calls. The first was to James Atherton, my solicitor for the last 15 years, a serious, reliable man who had handled Arthur's will with quiet compassion. Mrs. Holloway, his secretary, said, "Mr. Atherton can see you this afternoon at 2. Will that be suitable?" Perfect. The second call was to Martha Finch, my financial advisor, a shrewd woman with eyes that missed nothing, who had helped Arthur and me build our portfolio over the years. "Beatrice," Martha said when she came to the line. "How lovely to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need a full review of my assets, Martha. Everything. And I need to explore options for restructuring." There was a brief pause. Martha was sharp enough to recognize the tone of a woman on a warpath. "When would you like to meet?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll make time for you at 10. I spent the rest of the morning walking through the house with new eyes. It was no longer a home, but a property. The furniture Arthur and I had chosen, the family photographs on the walls, the small treasures accumulated over a lifetime. It all now fell into two categories: what was truly mine and what could be left behind. In my bedroom, I pulled 2 large suitcases from the top of the wardrobe and began to sort my clothes. Not everything would fit, so I chose carefully. What made me feel like myself, what held sentimental value, what I would need to begin again. The periwinkle blue dress went in first, carefully folded. At 2 o'clock, I was sitting opposite James Atherton's mahogany desk, my hands calm in my lap despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. I'd chosen a cream silk blouse and a well-cut navy blazer for the meeting. The feel of the quality fabric against my skin was a small armor of confidence. "Mrs. Holloway," James said, adjusting his spectacles. "Your message was intriguing. You wish to make significant changes to your will and financial arrangements." "That's right, James. I want to revoke my daughter's power of attorney. I want her and her husband removed from any accounts where they are named. I want to rewrite my will entirely, and I want to put the house on the market." James's eyebrows shot up. "Those are very significant changes indeed, Beatrice. May I ask what has prompted this?" I gave him the abridged version of recent events, focusing on facts, not feelings. James had seen enough families tear each other apart over money to understand immediately. "I see," he said finally. "And your grandchildren? Lily and Jack's university funds will remain untouched, but in a trust. A trust that cannot be accessed by their parents until the children are 25. I want to ensure they have opportunities, but I also want them to learn the value of work and respect. And the rest of your assets?" I took a deep breath. "A portion to educational charities. The rest for me, for my new life. And if Lily proves she has learned what family respect means, well, we shall see." James took meticulous notes. "When do you want these changes to take effect?" "Immediately. And James, I need this to remain in the strictest confidence until I am ready." "Of course. How long do you think you'll need?" 2 weeks, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "In 2 weeks, everything will be in place." That night, I sat in my room and opened my laptop. At the top of a new document, I typed, "Operation Dignity." Arthur always said I had a brilliant organizational mind. "You could run a small country, he used to joke. I had never run a country, but I was about to stage a coup in my own life. And for the first time in years, I felt utterly, exhilaratingly in control. For 2 weeks, I lived the life of a spy. I moved through the house like a ghost with a secret, a silent operative in my own home. My days were a performance of placid domesticity. I made porridge in the mornings. I remembered to pick up Sarah's dry cleaning. I listened to Mark's complaints about the traffic on the M25. But beneath the surface, Operation Dignity was proceeding with a military precision that would have made Arthur chuckle. James Atherton was efficient and discreet. All the legal documents were signed, sealed, and filed away. Martha Finch had restructured my finances with the deftness of a surgeon, creating firewalls and trusts that looked like simple consolidations until one realized the keys had been changed. The house was officially on the market, listed with an estate agent in a neighboring county to keep the secret buried a little longer. And that final morning, as Sarah yelled at the children to hurry up and Mark cursed because he couldn't find his favorite tie, I ate my toast and marmalade with the quiet satisfaction of a general on the eve of a silent, bloodless victory. After the house had emptied, a plain white van, exactly as I'd requested, pulled quietly into the drive. 3 men, led by a supervisor whose gentle hands and kind eyes reminded me of Arthur, came to the door. "All ready, Mrs. Holloway?" he asked. I handed him the list. "The destination is on the paperwork. I'm not taking much." The furniture Arthur and I had chosen together. A few pieces of art that held more memories than monetary value. My books? Oh, my precious books. A lifetime of literature that had been my truest companions, and the family photographs. The ones of Arthur and me, of the children when they were small and their eyes still held wonder, before Sarah had learned to look at me as if I were a piece of furniture she'd grown tired of. As the men carefully loaded the rocking chair where Arthur used to read me poetry on Sunday afternoons, my phone buzzed. It was Diane. "Are you sure about this, B?" she asked, her voice laced not with doubt, but with loving concern. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, watching as they carried my life's treasures out of the house that had become my prison. "Is the spare room still available?" "Your room is waiting," she said warmly. "I even bought new sheets, blue ones like that dress you told me about." I smiled, feeling the prickle of tears. After years of feeling invisible, someone had thought about the color of my sheets. Once the van was gone, I walked back into the hollowed-out house. On the polished oak of the dining table, I left 3 envelopes. One for Sarah and Mark, one for the children, and one I had hoped I would never have to write. The envelope for Sarah contained copies of the legal documents, a clear explanation of the financial changes, and a letter I had rewritten 5 times until the tone was just right. Firm, not cruel. Honest, not vengeful. Sarah, by the time you read this, I will be gone. This was not a decision made in anger, but in clarity. For 3 years, I have lived in this house feeling like an unwelcome guest. Tolerated, not respected. Your behavior on my birthday was simply the final confirmation. As I taught you when you were a child, our actions have consequences. The consequence of treating someone as disposable is that, eventually, they dispose of themselves. The house is for sale. You have 30 days to find another place to live. The children's university funds are secure, but everything else has changed. Learn to value what you have before it's gone. It is a lesson you clearly need to learn. Your mother, who respects herself. The letter to the children was softer, filled with love but also with important lessons about family and the courage to stand up for what is right. The third envelope was the most painful. It was for Lily specifically, because I had seen something in her eyes that night, a flicker of shame that gave me hope. My dearest Lily, if you find this letter, it means you decided to look on Grandma's bookshelf, just like you used to when you were little. You always knew the best treasures were hidden between the pages. I am not angry with you, my love, but I hope that when you are older, you remember this moment and choose to be different. Respect must begin at home. If you ever decide you want to know the grandmother who loves you unconditionally, find me. There will always be a place for you in my new life. With all my love, Grandma B. I tucked that letter inside my worn copy of Little Women, the book I used to read to her at 4 o'clock. A bright blue Mini Cooper zipped into the drive, and Diane hopped out, grinning like a teenager escaping for an adventure. Ready for your new life? She asked, helping me with the 2 suitcases that held all that was left of my old one. More than ready, I replied, taking one last look at the house. As we drove away, I saw Mrs. Patterson from next door watering her petunias. She waved, and I waved back, a lump forming in my throat as I realized she was witnessing the end of an era without even knowing it. I could picture the scene later that evening. Sarah returning from the gym to a strangely silent house. At first, she wouldn't notice anything specific, just an unnerving quiet. Then she'd see the envelopes on the table. Her scream, when she read the first few lines of my letter, would be a raw, animal sound of shock. She would run upstairs to my empty room, see the bare wardrobe, the vacant drawers. No, 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 she would murmur, stumbling back to the kitchen to reread the letter, her world tilting on its axis. That's when she would see the other envelope, the one I had taped to the fridge door, the one she'd missed in her panic. The official notice from the estate agent. 30 days to vacate the property. When Mark arrived home, he would find her on the kitchen floor, surrounded by legal papers, weeping in a way he had never seen before. What happened? He would ask, dropping his briefcase. She's gone, Sarah would sob. Mum's gone. And Mark, we have nothing. The accounts, the house, it was all in her name. All of it. Mark would pick up one of the documents, his eyes scanning the words that officially rendered them homeless and without the financial cushion they had taken for granted for so long. How could she do this? He would murmur. No warning, nothing. And in that moment of devastation, I hoped Sarah would finally understand. The warning was every time I asked for a little kindness. The warning was every time she treated me as if I didn't matter. Meanwhile, 150 miles away, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Diane's Mini, the windows down, the salty air whipping through my hair, the sound of the sea growing louder with every mile. We were laughing, sharing stories, bridging the gap of 30 years as if it were only 30 days. Do you regret it? She asked gently. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. No, I replied with absolute certainty. For the first time in years, I can breathe. 6 weeks after my arrival in Salcombe, I woke for the first time in decades without the familiar knot of dread in my stomach. The oppressive weight that had settled on my chest for years, which I had come to accept as a permanent part of my anatomy, had simply vanished. Pale morning light, soft as muslin, filtered through the lace curtains of my new bedroom, and the rhythmic shushing of the waves on the shore below had replaced the distant hum of traffic and the closer discord of family arguments. Diane, a creature of habit and boundless energy, was already awake. The scent of fresh coffee and baking scones drifted up the narrow staircase of our little townhouse. I slipped into a new dressing gown, a soft, lavender-colored cotton that Diane had insisted I buy, telling me it brought out the silver in my hair, and padded downstairs. Morning sunshine, Diane greeted me. She stood before the oven in a brightly colored apron, a smudge of flour on her cheek. I'm experimenting with a cranberry and orange scone recipe from the book club. The book club, one of the many small wonders of my new life. 3 days after my arrival, Diane had gently but firmly dragged me to the local library, where a group of 8 women met every Thursday to discuss books and, more importantly, to connect with one another in ways I had forgotten were possible. They smell divine, I said, pouring coffee into the blue and white striped mug Diane had designated as mine from day one. Every small gesture of belonging still felt like a precious gift. Margaret says the trick is not to overwork the dough, Diane continued, referring to a formidable woman of 72 who had raised 6 sons and now channeled her maternal energy into fussing over anyone who crossed her path. While we ate breakfast in the small sunroom overlooking the harbor, Diane chattered about her plans for the day. A trip to the farmer's market followed by a watercolor class in the park. She had taken up painting after her divorce, and her canvases, though amateur, were filled with a joy that radiated from every brushstroke. "Are you joining?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Today, I'm baking," I replied, feeling that familiar spark of purpose. Angela asked me to bring some biscuits for the children's story time on Saturday. Angela was the librarian, a woman with boundless energy and a genuine passion for connecting people through books. When she'd learned I had been ahead of English, she had immediately enlisted my help. At first, I had hesitated. Did I really want to be surrounded by children again? But the first time I sat in that circle of small, expectant faces, I remembered precisely why I had chosen to teach. It wasn't just a love for literature. It was the magic of seeing young minds expand, of being part of the moment a child discovers that words can build entire worlds. That little girl, Sophie, will she be there? Diane asked, her eyes twinkling. I was thinking of her, a bright 9-year-old who reminded me so much of Lily at that age, curious, observant, with an insatiable hunger for stories. Sophie appeared at the library every Wednesday with her grandmother, a quiet, hard-working woman who cleaned offices at night. The first time I'd seen her, Sophie was in the young adult section, devouring a book far above her reading level. "You lent her A Wrinkle in Time last week, didn't you?" Diane prompted. I smiled. Yes. And when she returned it, she had 3 pages of notes in a little spiral notebook, questions about tesseracts, theories about Mrs. Whatsit, even a few attempts at drawing the dark thing. The conversation we'd had about the book had been more insightful than some I'd had with my A-level students. There was a special spark in that child. "You're going to end up officially mentoring her, Diane predicted. Maybe, I admitted. Her grandmother mentioned Sophie wants to be a writer. I told her we could start a little creative writing workshop if there was interest. It was astonishing how easily I had fallen into this new rhythm. Quiet mornings, projects chosen for pleasure rather than obligation, conversations that nourished instead of drained me. In the afternoons, Diane and I would walk along the beach, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes sharing memories from our lost years or dreams for the ones that remained. I had even started writing again, just observations in a journal. But Angela had seen some of it and suggested I consider sharing my experiences. "You could start a support group," she'd said, "for women redefining their lives after 60. The idea intrigued me. That Thursday at our book club, we were discussing Karen Thompson Walker's The Age of Miracles, a novel about how people adapt when their world fundamentally changes. The irony was not lost on me. "Do you think it's possible to completely reinvent yourself after a certain age?" asked Susan, a woman of 58 who was struggling with empty nest syndrome. "Look at Bea," Margaret said, gesturing towards me with a warm smile. "She's a walking, talking reinvention." "Not a reinvention," I corrected gently. "A rediscovery. I'm becoming the person I always was, but had forgotten how to be." Later that afternoon, I was walking alone along the shoreline, the tide out, the sand damp and firm beneath my bare feet. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart gave a painful lurch. Asterisk Grandma, it's Lily. I found your letter. Can we talk? Asterisk I stopped, the waves lapping at my ankles. For 6 weeks, I had both dreaded and yearned for this message. Now that it was here, I wasn't sure how to respond. She had found the letter. She had looked for it. She had remembered. I typed and deleted several replies before settling on something simple. Asterisk hello, my love. Of course we can talk. When would be a good time for you? Asterisk the reply was almost immediate. Asterisk now. Mum and Dad are out. I'm alone. Asterisk I found a large piece of driftwood, smooth and silvered by the sea, and sat down, my hand trembling slightly as I dialed the number. Grandma? Lily's voice was small, hesitant. Hello, darling, I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. How are you? Confused, she admitted, and said, and I think I'm starting to understand why you left. For the next hour we talked. Really talked. She told me about the night of my birthday, how she'd felt sick inside but hadn't known what to do. She spoke of the tension in the house, of Sarah and Mark fighting constantly about money, of the blame being thrown around like confetti. I never realized how mean Mum was to you, she said, her voice cracking. I just thought, that's how families were. Not all families, my love, I told her gently, and it should never be that way. Can I come and see you? She asked finally. I know you're probably angry with me. I'm not angry with you, Lily, I interrupted. You were a child in a difficult situation. But if you want to visit, we would have to talk about some important things first. Like what? Like respect, and apologies, and what it really means to love someone. There was a long pause on the line. Then, her voice clearer, stronger, she said, I'm ready for that conversation, Grandma. As I ended the call and walked back towards the little townhouse where Diane was already preparing dinner, I felt a tremor of apprehension. The life I'd built here was so peaceful. Was I ready to complicate it again? But as I watched the gulls wheeling overhead and felt the salt spray on my face, I knew the answer was yes. Because this time it would be on my terms. The first official salvo came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after my call with Lily. I was in the small back garden, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil of a planter box, carefully bedding in some fragrant rosemary cuttings Diane and I had bought at the farmer's market. The sun was warm on my back, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and flowers. My phone, lying on the stone bench beside me, began to vibrate insistently. The name on the screen made my heart sink, but not with fear. It was a weary sort of resignation. James Atherton. Good morning, James, I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. Beatrice, I'm afraid I have some rather unpleasant news. Your daughter has initiated legal proceedings against you. I sat down heavily on the bench, a strange calm settling over me. I had been expecting this. What kind of proceedings? She's alleging dereliction of familial duty and is attempting to contest the changes to your will and financial arrangements. She is also claiming that you are suffering from some form of mental decline that rendered you incapable of making sound decisions. A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Mental decline? Apparently, her argument is that no mentally competent mother would abandon her family, especially leaving them without financial resources. I see. And what is your assessment of her chances? Practically nil, James replied with crisp certainty. We have recent medical documentation confirming your perfect mental state. We have detailed records of the years she had access to your finances without contributing to the household. And we have the simple fact that you were under no legal obligation to support her financially once she was a married adult. When is the hearing? In 2 weeks. Will you be available to testify? I looked up at the little townhouse, where I knew Diane was in the kitchen, probably humming along to Radio 2. I looked out towards the sliver of blue sea visible from our garden, a view that had become my daily dose of peace. Yes, James, I replied. I'll be there. That evening, over grilled salmon and new potatoes from the garden, I told Diane about the call. That girl of yours just doesn't know when to quit. Does she? Diane said, shaking her head. How are you going to handle it? With the truth, I replied simply. The unvarnished, unapologetic truth. The following week passed in a strange state of suspended animation. I continued my new routine: book club, library volunteering, beach walks, but underneath it all, I was mentally preparing for battle. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp, clear autumn morning. The courthouse in Exeter felt alien after 2 months of sea air and open spaces. Everything seemed smaller, more suffocating. Sarah was in the corridor with her solicitor, a young man who looked more nervous than she did. When she saw me, her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Shock, hurt, and finally, that familiar, stubborn resentment. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking, "you look different." It was true. I had lost the stressed weight I'd carried for years. My hair, which I'd let grow and now wore in a soft, swept-back style, was more silver but looked healthier. I was wearing a well-cut navy dress that made me feel professional and composed. "I feel different," I replied honestly. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, and for a fleeting moment, I heard the confused little girl she had once been. "Really, Sarah? You want to have this conversation here?" I asked softly, "because I will give you the full answer." Inside the courtroom, I sat with James as Sarah and her representative took their places. The judge, a woman with a no-nonsense expression, reviewed the documents. "This is an unusual case," she began. "Mrs. Lewis is alleging that her mother, Mrs. Holloway, irrationally abandoned her familial duties." Sarah's solicitor spoke first, painting a picture of a sudden, inexplicable abandonment, of a vulnerable family left destitute by a mother in the grip of cognitive decline. I listened without reaction, watching Sarah. She looked tired, thinner, a desperation in her eyes that pricked at something that might have been pity, had it not been for the hard knot of anger still residing in my chest. When it was my turn, I took the stand. For the next 40 minutes, I told my story, not with drama or self-pity, but with the factual clarity of a head teacher delivering a report. I spoke of the years of feeling like a guest in my own home. I described the pattern of disrespect that had culminated in the birthday humiliation. "At any point, did your daughter contribute financially to the household?" James asked. "No. For 3 years, I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, and most of my grandchildren's expenses." "And how did it feel to be treated this way in your own home?" "Like my presence was tolerated for my financial contributions, but my person was not valued," I replied, looking directly at Sarah. The most powerful moment came when James asked me to describe the birthday dinner. My daughter compared the meal I had lovingly prepared to pig swill, I said, my voice steady. She suggested it was appropriate for me to eat it. In that moment, I understood I had raised a daughter who thought it was acceptable to publicly humiliate the woman who had brought her into the world. I saw Sarah flinch, her face pale. The judge deliberated for less than 15 minutes. "This court finds that Mrs. Holloway acted entirely within her legal and moral rights," she announced. "There is no evidence of mental decline. In fact, the evidence suggests Mrs. Holloway made thoughtful, considered decisions after years of being treated with a profound lack of respect." Then the judge did something unexpected. She addressed Sarah directly. "Mrs. Lewis, your mother provided you with a home and complete financial support for 3 years. The fact that you felt entitled to these benefits while treating their provider with such disdain shows a fundamental lack of gratitude. This court cannot compel anyone to tolerate emotional abuse, regardless of family ties." Case dismissed. As I was leaving, Sarah caught up with me in the car park. "Mom, please," she wept, her composure finally shattering.
"I'm sorry.
"I know I was wrong, but we're family. That has to mean something." I stopped and turned to her. "You're right," I said softly. "We are family. And that does mean something. It means respect, kindness, and mutual support. When you're ready for that kind of relationship, you know where to find me. Until then, learn to love your children in a way you never learned to love me. Perhaps then, one day, we can start again." Driving back to Salcombe, I passed a sign for a scenic viewpoint. On impulse, I pulled over. The view stretched for miles, a patchwork of green fields and rolling hills under a vast, open sky. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. A text from Lily. *Grandma, I heard about court. Are you okay? Can I visit soon? I think Mum is finally starting to understand. Asterisk for the first time, my smile held a flicker of hope for the future. But it was a small flicker, and it was entirely on my terms. 3 weeks later, I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a batch of my signature Chelsea buns, when I heard a car pull into our gravel drive. Car I didn't recognize. From the passenger seat, a slim figure with a familiar brown ponytail emerged. Lily. But what shocked me even more was who got out of the driver's seat. It was Mark. Alone. He looked up at the house, then at Lily, a look of profound uncertainty on his face. He'd brought her. He had actually brought her. He had crossed the battle lines. A new chapter, I realized, was about to begin, whether I was ready for it or not.